and welcome to the coronavirus lockdown live stream, the show that brings welcome levity to the end of the world, lifting the spirits of many of you currently in self-isolation by infecting as many as possible with comfort and distraction as the apocalypse unfolds. You join me for the final lockdown live stream of March 2020. The lockdown live stream will be continuing in April, albeit in a slightly different format, but I will be getting to that in more detail shortly. Nice to see 33 of you ready, standing ready and prepared to inundate me, hopefully, with comments and questions, whatever you need to get off your chest. Just deposit it in a comment, either on Facebook, or if you want to stick it to Zuckerberg, you can follow us on Twitch using, let's see, this address here. So all that remains is for me to crack on with... I'm sorry, I realize that some of this is very disturbing, but again, I'm sorry, I think it's good for us to know what we're up against. It's good to know what viruses are and how they work and how they have been successfully defeated in the past. And yesterday we were learning all about, oh crikey, just bear with me viewers, I forgot to send an invite link to our panelists. So Covert is ready to join us in the green room while I'm boring you all with reading. I knew I'd forgotten something. I was so busy tweeting out the link, but there we go. I've remedied that situation, hopefully, so that Covert can be waiting, because I know Covert can join today. Sasha can't, unfortunately, but there we go. So I'm up to pages 328 and 329, and if you remember, yesterday we were learning all about smallpox and how it's killed so many people, even in the 20th century. In fact, I had a question about that, about how many it had killed. Yeah, the death toll in the 20th century alone is thought to have been around 500 million for smallpox. Astonishing when you think about it. And it's a really unpleasant thing. I actually went on Wikipedia yesterday to research it more and see what it did to people. And horrible, quite apart from the fact that it killed you, it would do awful things to your skin as well. And we were learning about how Janet Parker and, let's see here, Henry Bedson were the last two people to be killed by the disease. And it was after Henry Bedson had opened up a sample to research it before he was required to destroy it. And Janet Parker just happened to be 2 floors away in the same building, and it came through the ventilation system. Quite astonishing. And we also learned that officially just 2 stocks of smallpox remain in the world in government freezers at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, and at a Russian virology institute near Novosibirsk in Siberia. And I learned also from Wikipedia that in September 2019, there was an explosion at this facility in Russia. Fortunately, it wasn't near where the viruses were being stored, but you can easily see how, under different circumstances, that could have been catastrophic. So with that in mind, let's proceed with another couple of pages. Both countries, that's the USA and Russia, have several times promised to destroy the remaining stocks, but never have. In 2002, the CIA claimed there were probably also stocks in France, Iraq, and North Korea. No one can say whether or how many samples may survive accidentally as well. In 2014, someone looking through a storage area at a US Food and Drug Administration facility in Bethesda, Maryland, found vials of smallpox dating from the 1950s, but still viable. The vials were destroyed, but it was an unnerving reminder of how easily such samples can be overlooked. With smallpox gone, tuberculosis is today the deadliest infectious disease on the planet. Between 1.5 and 2 million people die of it every year. It is another disease that we have mostly forgotten, but only a couple of generations ago it was devastating. Lewis Thomas, writing in the New York Review of Books in 1978, recalled how hopeless all treatments for tuberculosis were in the 1930s when he was a medical student. Anyone could catch it, he noted, and there was really nothing you could do to make yourself safe from infection. If you got it, that was it. The hardest part of the disease for both the patient and the family was that it took so long to die, Thomas wrote. The only relief was a curious phenomenon near the end known as there's no chance I'm going to pronounce that, Bill Bryson. Something, when the patient suddenly became optimistic and hopeful, even mildly elated. This was the worst of signs. Something meant that death was coming soon. As a scourge, TB actually got worse as time passed. Until late in the 19th century, it was known as consumption and was believed to be inherited. But when the microbiologist Robert Koch, is it Koch or Koch? I don't know, discovered the tubercle bacillus in 1882, the medical community realized beyond doubt that it was infectious, a far more unnerving proposition to loved ones and carers alike, and it became more widely known as tuberculosis. Victims previously were sent to sanatoria entirely for their own sake. Now there was more an urgent sense of exile. Almost everywhere, patients were subjected to harsh regimens. At some institutions, doctors reduced patients' lung capacity by cutting nerves to their diaphragm, a process known as phrenic crush, or by injecting gas into their chest cavity so that the lungs couldn't fully inflate. At Frimley Sanatorium in England, authorities tried the opposite tack. Inmates were given pickaxes and made to do hard, pointless labor in the belief that that would strengthen their wearied lungs. None of these did or possibly could do the slightest bit of good. In most places, however, the approach was simply to keep patients very quiet, to try to stop the disease from spreading from their lungs to other parts of their bodies. Patients were forbidden to talk, write letters, or even read books or newspapers for fear that the content would unnecessarily excite them. Betty MacDonald, in her popular and still very readable 1948 book, The Plague and I, about her own experiences in a TB sanatorium in Washington state, recorded that she and other inmates were allowed visits by their children just once a month for 10 minutes and by spouses and other adults for 2 hours on Thursdays and Sundays. Patients were not allowed to talk or laugh unnecessarily or to sing ever. They were ordered to lie perfectly still for most of their waking day and not permitted to bend over or reach for things. If TB is off the radar for most of us, that's because 95% of its 1.5 million plus annual deaths are in low or middle income countries. About 1 in every 3 people on the planet carries the TB bacterium, but only a small proportion of those contract the disease. 1 in every 3 people on the planet, gosh. But it is still around. About 700 people a year die from tuberculosis in America. Some boroughs of London now have rates of infection that nearly match those of Nigeria or Brazil. No less alarmingly, drug-resistant strains of TB account for 10% of new cases. It is entirely possible that we could one day in the not-too-distant future be facing an epidemic of TB that medicine cannot treat. Lots of historically formidable diseases are still out there, not quite entirely vanquished. Even bubonic plague is still around, believe it or not. Good grief. It's amazing we're still alive at this point, isn't it? The United States averages 7 cases a year. Most years, there are 1 or 2 deaths. And there are lots of diseases in the wider world from which most of us in developed countries are spared. Diseases like leishmaniasis, trachoma, and yaws, which few of us have even heard of. Those 3 and 15 others, known collectively as neglected tropical diseases, affect more than 1 billion people worldwide. More than 120 million people, to take just one example, suffer from lymphatic filariasis, a disfiguring parasitic infection. Don't make me say that again, Bill Bryson. What is particularly unfortunate is that a simple compound added to table salt could eliminate the filariasis wherever it appears. Many of the other neglected tropical diseases are beyond horrible. Guinea worms. Oh, they're horrible. I've heard of those. Guinea worms grow up to 1 meter long inside the bodies of their victims, then escape by burrowing out of their skin. The only treatment, even now, is to speed the process of exit by winding the worms onto a stick as they emerge. I very nearly did a video on this, and in fact, I may do a video at some point. You know how the organization does, was it designed videos? I want to do one on the guinea worm. In fact, I want to do one on several organisms that specifically target humans and cause misery and death for humans, and say, was it designed? You know, just leave that question hanging. To say that much of our progress against these diseases has been hard won is to put it mildly. Consider the contribution of the great German parasitologist Theodor Bilharz, 1825 to 1862, who is often called the father of tropical medicine. His entire career was devoted, at constant risk to himself, to trying to understand and conquer some of the world's most infectious diseases. Wishing to better understand the truly horrid disease, oh, come on, Bill Bryson. Schistosomiasis, there we go. Also now sometimes called Bilharzia in his honor. Bilharz bandaged the pupae of Caesarea worms to his stomach and took careful notes over the following days as they burrowed through his skin en route to invading his liver. Imagine taking note of something like that. I'd just be screaming. My notes would just be, ah. He survived that experience, but died soon afterwards, well, no surprise, aged just 37, after contracting typhus while trying to help stop an epidemic of the disease in Cairo. Okay, so it was something else that killed him. Similarly, Howard Taylor Ricketts, 1871 to 1910, the American discoverer of the bacterial group Rickettsia, went to Mexico to study typhus, but contracted the disease himself and died. His fellow American, Jesse Lazier, 1866 to 1900, from the Johns Hopkins Medical School, went to Cuba in 1900 to try to prove that yellow fever was spread by mosquitoes, caught the disease, probably by intentionally infecting himself, and died. Stanislaus von Provazek, 1875 to 1915, of Bohemia, traveled the world studying infectious diseases and found the agent behind trachoma before succumbing to typhus himself in 1915 while working on an outbreak at a German prison. I could go on and on. Medical science has never produced a more noble and selfless group of investigators than the pathologists and parasitologists who risked and all too often lost their lives in trying to conquer the most pernicious of the world's diseases in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There ought to be a monument to them somewhere. Very good point there, Bill Bryson. And we'll leave it there for now, because there's just one more section for me to read. In fact, there's 3.5 pages left in this chapter, and then we're done. and I won't be traumatizing you any further with this chapter. Let's bring in Covert Fade. How are you doing, Covert?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I have tuned in this morning with my coffee to hear you talking about parasitic worms burrowing through flesh. So thanks for that. I'm feeling good now. I'm feeling good.
It's certainly a novel way to start the day, I think.
Yeah, it kind of get out of bed, get some coffee, feel nice and snuggly in your pajamas. Hear about the diseases that rack the planet. Although it's actually, I haven't read that Bill Bryson book, and I keep meaning to. Because it's one of those books that you keep hearing about and people keep telling you that it's a really, really interesting book, and I never get around to it. So I am actually quite enjoying it, but hearing it kind of vicariously. But yeah,
it's a reminder, I think, that diseases and viruses and things that kill you in nature are nothing new.
yeah.
And if anything, it makes you feel grateful that you've evaded most of this awfulness. We don't have, hopefully, a worm burrowing through our leg as we speak. So
Yeah,
think yourselves lucky.
exactly. Well, that worm, I have JW family members who spent a lot of time with the organization, actually being special pioneers in certain parts of Africa, and they saw the guinea worm. Yeah, and they saw that up close. And I remember them telling me about that when I was a little kid, and I was absolutely traumatized at the thought of that disease. And I was like, that must be like a fate worse than death. So it like you say, it kind of puts it in perspective that it could be worse.
It really, really could be worse. Eric Larson says, your reading that has made me want to find and order that book now seems interesting. It is interesting, and I'm just focusing on the relevant chapter on diseases, but there's an awful lot of other stuff about the human body and how its inner workings that is truly fascinating. Kai Routledge says, examining the scriptures daily, today's verse, smallpox. Rianne, this was just before you joined. Covert, nice to see you in a sec.
Hi, Rianne.
Patricia Brown says, was that what was given to the Native Americans in blankets? Yes, I was actually reading about this again on Wikipedia yesterday because I'm now completely fascinated by smallpox. And apparently the British deliberately infected Native Americans with smallpox as part of their strategy, I'm ashamed to say. So, and which, again, if you think about it, is another argument for just destroying the thing entirely, because we can talk about the need to study it, but while there is a possibility to weaponize this thing, let's destroy it. It's like, it's like biological warfare, isn't it? Cynthia Luna says, I love the info from this book reading. Thanks from Texas. Thanks so much, Cynthia. Jody is following along from the East Coast, 2:35 a.m. Good grief.
Wow.
That's sacrifice for you. Robert Conway says, first time I got to catch this live stream live. Greetings from Ontario, Canada. That's going to be atrocious time as well. That's going to be silly o'clock. So well done for joining us there, Robert. I will be announcing a different schedule that will be more considerate to those of you over in the Americas. So stay tuned for that later on. Simon Instone says, I wrote a very highbrow poem for, do you mean Poetry Corner? The truth they say they'll bring to light as long. Should we save this for? In fact, we don't have a Poetry Corner today because Sasha unfortunately can't join us. So the truth they say they'll bring to light as long as your pants aren't too tight. They say it's last days. What is there to say? The governing body are wrong. You see, the rhyming was on point for the first part, and then get kind of deviated slightly towards the end. But good effort.
I like that. I actually quite like the little the twist that last word doesn't rhyme. Weirdly enough, I think it's quite. It was quite nice.
Sorry, it does rhyme. They say it's last days. What is there to say? So just that, yeah, okay. Nice one, Simon. Thank you for that. If you do have any other poems at all, viewers, feel free to send them in, and I will do my very best to do them justice. I fear I butchered that one slightly. Yeah, Patricia Brown saying 12:37 a.m. Mountain Time here. Good grief. Let's see here. Yeah, Patricia Brown, get the leeches. Good grief. There's all sorts of stuff out there that wants to kill you or remove parts of you. And that's before we even start talking about mosquitoes. Have you seen that meme, Covert, of, John Travolta in Pulp Fiction going like that?
Yes.
And it says, when the mosquitoes come out, they're like, love it. Love it. Stivy on Twitch says, hi from Australia, Lloyd. Big fan. Hello. Oh, sorry, Stivel, I should say. Thanks for tuning in from Australia. I think this time suits Australia better because it's in the evening in Australia when people are settling down with their glasses of wine, ready for some poetry, you might say. Jody Coyote says, Matthew Tino, is that what it is? I'm usually up at 3:30 anyway for satanic yoga. Good grief, what's that like? And non-JW, so you just mean normal yoga, but obviously that's interpreted as satanic by Jehovah's Witnesses. And a non-JW type of meditation. What's one more hour at this point? Well said. Joan Ferguson, Bill Bryson, one of the great funny writers, but this book isn't funny at all. It's pretty grim, although it does actually raise a chuckle in parts. It's dealing with kind of death and all the various ways that nature tries to kill us. So yeah, it is a bit grim.
A crazy roller coaster romp through the human body count.
Indeed. And Hege Langurgen, I probably butchered the pronunciation, says, good morning from hell. And yes, it's a place in Norway.
Yeah.
Have you been there, Covert, on your international travels?
I haven't been to hell. Not the hell in Norway, anyway. The other hell, that's a long story about me descending into the pitches of flame and darkness to retrieve people from the depths of the underworld. But, we'll talk about that another time.
That's another mission.
That's another mission, yeah. But hell itself, no, I haven't been there. I have been to Norway. I've been to quite a few places in Norway, but not there yet.
Matthew Tino says, I had studies with a couple of those diseases. Do you mean that you had Bible studies with people who had those diseases, or you literally were studying the diseases? I'd be interested to know. He says the treatment was horrific. It certainly doesn't sound pleasant. Let's just see here. Steve-O Ismay says, I remember lining up at school, 7-year-old, in your underpants, getting jabs in both arms, using the same needle heated over a candle.
Oh, no.
I'm wondering whether you're betraying your age there, Steve-O, because that sounds like the Middle Ages, quite frankly. But it's not that inconceivable that it wasn't so long ago, depending on school budgets and that kind of thing. Yeah, these are old comments. Rianne saying, OMG, I honestly don't want to know about this worm. Probably that's why I haven't made the video yet, because it is so grisly.
It is like a sci-fi horror. This is one of the things where a lot of the kind of the sci-fi horror writers who come up with horrific creatures that do awful things to you usually just find something that actually exists and tweak it a bit. I mean, the whole concept of the alien, from the H.R. Geiger's Alien from the classic Alien films, is essentially just based on stuff that already exists, like the spider wasp that lays its eggs in spiders, and then the larvae erupt and eat the spider alive. It's just like, yeah,
not pleasant stuff. Eric Larson says this is still more pleasant than the My Book of Bibles Stories book. I think that goes without saying. How long before Lloyd sends in an audition recording to Audible? I think Bill Bryson has already done the audiobook to this, so no need for me to put in an audition. But yeah, I swear there was an Awake article on the guinea worm. I bet it didn't have the heading, was it designed? Probably it was blamed on the Adamic curse or something like that. Good morning from my lockdown corner somewhere in Finland, says Isaac Zicki Witherspoon II. I woke up around the same time as you. Yes, you're on the same time zone as we are here in Croatia. Baxter John says it's a book that doesn't gloss over the really nasty parts of life. Hint, it's not genital. Okay, I don't get that part about genitals. Some people are clearly trying to stop this from being monetized. And I resent that. Susan Wheatley says, Spoggy fart. Haven't heard of that here in Victoria. Thanks for the education, Sherry. Now I need to go and find Sherry's comment. Silly o'clock in South Australia is called Spoggy fart. Did you know that, Covert?
I have absolutely no knowledge of spoggy farts. This is an education for me.
A spoggy is a sparrow. So, but when you hear the sparrows, you're not hearing them breaking wind. You're hearing them presumably singing.
You'd assume so, unless they're really talented, and what we assume is them singing is actually them farting.
Australians are a bit weird with their nomenclature or nomenclature. We've had this before. I'm going to induce Arthur to correct me on my pronunciation. So yes, that with lots of comments coming through, and nice to see 76 currently following us on the live stream. I'll come back to the comments shortly, but I want to hear, Covert, what the situation is on the ground in dear old Blighty. You're probably following the news more closely than I am, and just tell us how things are generally in your life.
Things are generally proceeding. I mean, I'm home working. We're all still on lockdown, but lockdown in the UK, you are still allowed to go out once a day for exercise. You're allowed to do essential travel, like, pick up shops and stuff. So I'm not literally confined to the house. I don't have any. The only exception would be if I actually had symptoms, and I don't. So if you have symptoms, you have to go in total lockdown. News-wise, I am following that quite closely. What they're saying is all the scientific advisors who do all that, because in the UK now they hand the briefings over to a lot of the science team, and they also bring in people like the Imperial College study team who do a lot of computer models. And they're saying they're starting to see signs that the social distancing and the stuff like that is working. They think they're starting to see that filter through into the figures. They're not making definitive statements yet, because you can't just take one, a couple, 2 or 3 days worth of figures and assume that's the trend. But what they're saying is they're starting to think they're seeing that now. So yeah, I'm just kind of watching and following, really. It's all kind of proceeding as you'd expect. I think everyone's just kind of waiting. Most people are doing their thing. There's been a bit of an argument with whether or not the police can stop people doing certain things. I think there's a bit of controversy that some feel that some police forces have been stopping people for things which are actually allowed. So they've had a bit of a to and forth where that's been clarified as to exactly what the police can and can't stop you for. And there's also been an argument about some people have been trying to claim that Easter eggs are not an essential purchase and shops can't sell them, whereas all the shops have been like, well, we've got thousands and thousands of Easter eggs. And apparently it's been clarified that yes, they can sell them. Like if a shop is allowed to remain open, it can sell whatever it has. But yeah, so we almost didn't get our chocolate Easter eggs, but they've been saved at the last minute. So.
I don't really understand that though, because they can say Easter eggs aren't an essential purchase, but Easter eggs are made of chocolate, and chocolate is just basically sugar, and the body needs some amount of sugar. In fact, I think in survival situations, don't like mountaineers normally take a bar of chocolate with them or something like that just to keep their blood sugar levels up. So
yeah,
just because it's in the shape of an egg doesn't render it less important, So I don't
egg-shaped chocolate is somehow less, yeah.
Depending on the shape.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that they've sort of said that alcohol is essential, so they've allowed off licenses to remain open, which is good, because the whole thing is it's a morale thing. If you're gonna have people in this kind of situation, you actually want to do as much as you can to sort of boost morale. So it's weird that alcohol is essential, but chocolate isn't. I would have thought that chocolate was more essential than alcohol.
I can't really think of anything that wouldn't be essential that you would find in a supermarket. It's all food and edible stuff, isn't it? I mean, there's an argument for closing down. Do they have PC World still and Comet and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's an argument for people not buying TVs and that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I think they've closed those physical brick and mortar stores, but you can still order all of that online. Because I know there's been like a massive run on laptops and fridges and everything else. So you can still order all that. But I can see the argument for like you don't need to physically go and grab that as an emergency. But yeah, like something like a supermarket, you might just need to go out and get food. So I suppose I'm kind of I have thought it through, but not to the point where I'm any kind of expert. So I always try and basically anything I say about the current coronavirus thing, I always caveat it with, I'm a moron. You shouldn't be listening to my opinion on this. Go find an expert and listen to them.
Yeah, but it's still good to hear the thoughts of Covert Fade. They're always nice to listen to, even if just the voice that they're expressed in. So in terms of Croatia, we actually did a dash yesterday. We ran the gauntlet, and it was because what was the reason for it now? Oh yeah, we needed gas. So here in Croatia, in the UK, most houses are actually plugged into the mains gas.
Yeah.
But in Croatia, they don't have mains gas, so you need to have either like a large submarine style bottle outside your house, or you basically buy you have a bottle at all times, and you just literally go and switch it, and you pay for the actual cost of the gas itself. And so we needed a new bottle of gas, so we did a run to our nearest fuel station and got the gas. And while we were there, we thought, well, we're so close to the shops, let's just see what condition the shops are in. And we drove past one supermarket, and there were people doing the line outside. We thought, can we really be bothered to go through that line when we're literally just interested in seeing what the situation is? So we drove to another supermarket where they didn't have a line, and Diana did a dash in to get some bananas and some vegetables and that kind of thing. And she said that the selection was pretty bad. There was almost no fresh vegetables, but there were still some things that were useful. And then she went into like a boot style shop, hoping that there might be some disinfectant, hand sanitizer and that kind of thing. They had nothing. And they said it comes through every Thursday, and then it sells out within minutes, so so that's the situation here. And we also Diana's been keeping tabs on the situation more broadly in Croatia, and apparently was it yesterday or the day before, there was some unusually warm weather in Split, which I know you've been
to.
There was some unusually warm weather there, so there's a particular beach that the locals in Split all flocked to despite the lockdown and despite the pandemic. And apparently the police turned up and said, what are you all doing? You should all be inside. And some of the locals were like, you can't stop us. We want to enjoy this nice weather, do one sort of attitude. And they got arrested. So the Croatian police, taking no nonsense from people, which is actually encouraging to see, because it's not about whether you catch it. I wish people would understand this. And I think broadly people do understand it. It's not about whether you catch it or not. It's about the potential for you to become a vector so that someone else catches it and dies. So
well, that's the thing. It's and like you say, Lloyd, I think most people do understand this, and I think most people are actually sensible in doing. It's just that it's only a small percentage of people, but because they're the only people doing it, they then look like they're huge. And I think this is because at one point, sometimes if you look at the news, it looks like the UK's gone mad, and at one point everyone was being really stupid. I mean, it's actually very good now. It looks like there's a lot of people are following the rules, but they had one news story about the police turned up, and there was this massive. This was I think a day after the lockdown became compulsory, and the police turned up, and there was a barbecue full of like 20 people, and they just refused. They refused to move on, and this was just before the police actually got the powers to arrest or to fine you. So the cops just turned the barbecue over. But it was like, that's the thing. It's not necessarily about whether or not you catch it, because if you aren't in one of the critical risk categories, you will probably be fine. Although caveat, apparently it's a really awful experience. I've been reading for like people who in their 30s who've had it, and they're like, I recovered, but it's awful. It's like struggling to breathe and hacking up. Just the coughing is awful, and there is some concern that if you get a really bad case of it, and they don't know this for certain apparently, but there's a concern that if you get a really bad case of it, even if you're not in the bad risk category, you could get lung damage. So it's even on that basis, it's like, I'd rather not have it, thanks. I'd rather be, I'm not going to like isolate myself in a bunker, like, for like the next 20 years on the grounds that I might catch it. Once lockdown's lifted, I'll be fine to go out again. And if I get it in 20 years because it's still going around, fair enough. But it's like, if I can avoid it, I'd rather, because it sounds awful.
And, even though it affects less young people, it still does affect some young people. I think the youngest in Europe was 16. And wasn't there a girl in the UK who was 21?
They did later clarify, I think, that death, initially it came down at like she wasn't in a high risk category, and then there was some clarification later that I can't remember. It was either that she did have an underlying condition or that she'd actually died of something else. But they were saying, even so, I mean, you can be sick. The other thing they say is you can be in a high risk category and not know it. You might have an underlying condition that's just never come to light because it's never been bad enough for you to go to the doctor.
Especially if you're like 16 or 17 or 18,
Exactly. Yeah. So you could be out there thinking, I'm fine. Or you might be out there thinking, oh, all my friends are fine. And then you give it to your friend and they die. So, yeah.
Jenny Journey says, morning, Covert and Lloyd, sending a warm hug from Chile, Hampshire, UK. Thanks for all your amazing support over the years. You'll never know how many goats you've helped. I don't think of you as a goat, Jenny, but I know exactly what you're referring to, and those are lovely sentiments. I also had a clarification from we were talking before about, I think it was Matthew Tino who was talking about his experience with various tropical diseases, and he's clarified that it was Bible studies that he was referring to.
Yeah.
Very unpleasant. Let's just see here. Scrolling through. I don't think I've read this one yet. Isaac Zicki Witherspoon, watching from Finland. Thank you so much, Isaac. Rianne says, I was once in hell. I think she's referring to hell in Norway. My gosh, it was cold there. I saw literally hell freeze over. Boom. Thanks for that, Rianne. Johnny Boy Diego on Twitch says, you guys could literally talk about anything and I would lap it up all the same. Spoggy fart and burrowing worms. We have had that, if you're just joining us. What am I watching? Yeah. Well, it's nice to know we have a loyal viewership who will stick with us through thick and thin. And we have a large comment from Mario, obscuring me. Many will be grateful. Hi, Lloyd. Greetings from Vienna, Austria. I guess that our planned gathering in May will be postponed until further notice. Yes, I was planning to go to Vienna because it's not that far away from where I live.
I love Vienna. It's a beautiful city.
Gorgeous, isn't it? Even through the lockdown, you are doing an amazing work with your daily live stream. Please stay healthy and above all, inside. In Austria, social life is very much limited right now, starting with Wednesday. Wearing masks in supermarkets are a must. Without it, you can't go in. Yeah, there were people going into the supermarket, I noticed yesterday, still not wearing masks. So it seems to be, yeah.
Are they supplying them to people? Because I get that if you've got them, you have to wear it. But I can think, because I know there's such a limited supply at the moment. I don't know what the situation is in Croatia or Vienna, but
I don't know. The thing is, I don't know how you would hand them out without creating a situation in which the virus could spread easily.
That's a good point,
I think they're just leaving it for people to get them. Police is patrol regularly to make sure that people are not gathering outside. So, yeah, sounds like Vienna is dealing with things responsibly. And yes, when I can get there, I would love to get to Vienna. Susan Wheatley says, an XJW friend in her 40s in England has it. Oh dear. Not bad enough to be in hospital, but it has knocked her on her ass for a few weeks. She says it's the worst weakness and flu symptoms ever. It does
Mm.
sound pretty horrendous. I think psychologically it would be quite traumatic to get it as well, wouldn't it? Especially with it being so. Even if you don't get it in a form that hospitalizes you, if you're getting it and you are recognizing the symptoms and it's, as she says, kind of flooring you, you're going to be terrified, aren't you? So just purely from the mental health point of view, it's best to avoid it. Patricia Brown says, listen to a person whose parents are in convalescence, and as they have caught the virus and are dying, they cannot go to visit or hug them. Goodbye. Okay, so
the parents have the virus, I think, and are dying, but they can't go to visit. Is that
oh,
what she's
right? Is that what you're saying, Patricia? That your parents are dying from it and you can't go and visit them? If you could clarify that, we'd appreciate it.
Because I've heard a lot of actually heartbreaking stories of people who, because what they're having to do is if you have it and you're in isolation and you're dying, they have to limit your exposure to other people. So there are people who can't say goodbye to people who are dying. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
Charlene Chancellor says, my daughter is an ED nurse in Sacramento, California. She had 5 COVID-19 positive cases in her section yesterday during a 12-hour shift. They are having to use the same face mask all day. I sewed some for her and co-workers and shipped them up to her last week. Well, good for you, Charlene. And yeah, I think this was touched on in Bill Bryson's book, dealing with those who were researching pathogens. The same can really be said for those who are kind of hurling themselves onto the front line to try and stem the tide of death, essentially, and putting themselves at risk to treat people. Well, it's really true altruism, isn't it? John Boy Diego says, in my village in northern England, a young lad's kitchen was raided because there were 25 people having a rave. Oh, good grief. That does actually sound quite northern England-esque, if I may say. Needless to say, they were all arrested. Some people are demented. Yeah. Rianne says, some guys in the Netherlands got in big trouble. They had a Corona party. Not really. You've missed the point of what it is, haven't you, really?
Oh, no.
With 35 people, they had to pay €400 per person, and quite right so. Nitz Walsh says fines can go up to 50,000 Canadian dollars here. Baxter John says Boris Johnson is no help shaking everybody's hand. Of course, he famously was boasting about shaking hands, wasn't he? And then famously caught it. So, yeah, less said about that, the better. Okay, there's a comment there in Spanish, but my Spanish is appalling, so I'm afraid I can't read that. But lovely to know that the live stream's going out to so many different countries. Eric Larson says there's a gun store near where I work that's been refusing to close because business has never been better for them. Good grief. I don't understand this rushing to buy guns. You can't shoot the thing. And why would you be chomping at the bit to shoot people during a pandemic? I don't know. And Nesbo9 says, as a young JW, we were allowed to buy an Easter egg if it was reduced because it was broken and no longer egg-shaped. That does sound like the sort of kind of arbitrary rule that one would use to get around. I can actually remember, no laughing matter, I can remember being given an Easter egg at work and feeling awful for having accepted it without refusing it. And my solution was to pull over on the way home, go to a bin and put it in the bin.
Oh, no.
That's how indoctrinated I was. I'm sure lots can think of similar stories of how they've evaded eating egg-shaped chocolate in case it incurs the wrath of the Almighty.
Did you have a rule? Because we were allowed, this is weird, and this is an example, I think, of how a lot of JW parents, in quite a good way, try and give their kids nice things without breaking the rules. We were allowed to have Easter eggs after Easter. So if it was after Easter, my parents took the view it was no longer part of the Easter celebrations, and they'd go out and get us Easter eggs, but we get them later where they'd kind of hide them and they'd give them to us later in the year before the best before date, so it wasn't like moldy, but they give it to us later. And I think it was their way of trying to make sure we still had the nice things without breaking the rules. Did you ever have anything like that? I mean, maybe not with Easter eggs, but with other things. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we had something similar where we'd have them weeks after or something like that. It's just silly if you think about it. You're literally just basing it on like an arbitrary rule that you've made up. It's either good or it's not. Rianne says, my son was terribly sick, 38 years old, ex-Navy, no other health issues, still in hospital. Yeah, you were looking forward, weren't you, Rianne, to him being released, I think, the other day. Sad to know he's still there. I hope he gets a speedy recovery.
And that's like you're saying, like Lloyd, that's worth saying, even if you're saying, well, I'm incredibly fit and it's not at risk to me, even if you're going to disregard the risk you're posing to other people, you can still roll the dice and get unlucky with this virus.
Well, 38 is two years younger than me. I think younger than you, I think. Anyway, it's young, isn't it? 38. Simon in Stone says, I was very lucky with it, but it was hard to breathe and horrible headache. My little girl was coughing a lot, but still mild. Very lucky. Obviously, my heart goes out to everyone who has it worse than we did.
The headache's interesting. It's one of those symptoms apparently that you get with this, which is like, I mean, and that's the thing. I actually hate having a headache. I mean, the rest of the symptoms, like the fever sounds awful. Struggling to breathe sounds like hell on earth. And then if you're going to throw a headache in there, which is one of my kind of personal, for some reason, headaches just like drive me crazy. Yeah, this thing's like, if I get it, I'm sure I'd survive it, but I'm absolutely convinced I would have an abysmal couple of weeks. So I'm quite happy to also isolate. Thanks.
On a slightly different subject, avoidance of headaches is one of my main motivating factors for having days of the week where I just don't drink, because it's nice. Because when I was sort of in my 20s, I had quite a high tolerance to alcohol, and I think it was because I drank so much as a JW. But then I had less of a need for alcohol after I woke up, and as such, my tolerance dropped. And so it doesn't require much alcohol to give me a headache when I wake up the next day. And one of my, I've since kind of developed this thing where I have nights of the week where I don't drink, those being Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And I actually relish those nights because I know when I go to bed, I'm not going to wake up with a headache, or it's very unusual that I would. So, I hate headaches. I really do.
Have you ever done, because I know we've chatted, sorry, I don't mean to distract from what we're doing. No. I know we've chatted about this before, about alcohol consumption among Jehovah's Witnesses, and when you leave it, it's kind of like, I mean, I went through a phase where I actually did 6 months without alcohol completely last year. And it was partly because I'd realized I'd developed really bad habits with alcohol as a coping mechanism as a JW. But doing that 6 months without, it was absolutely amazing to see the difference in just how I felt. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that or it's a good idea, but just for me, it underlined, taking a break, like dialing your alcohol tolerance down, like you say, maybe going every other day without it. And when you get to the point when you go back on it and you realize actually now it only takes a little bit to get me to that level, whereas before it made me realize how much I had to drink before it had an impact on me. I think that was the scary thing. It was more when I realized, wow, how much I had to drink previously before I felt the impact. Whereas now it's like I feel like I have a healthy tolerance. I can drink it and I enjoy it, but I definitely feel the impact much faster.
Yeah, I think it's a case of, for me as well, it's just a case of wanting to limit as much as possible the things that might kill me. And heart disease, is a thing that affects lots of people, and drinking certainly doesn't help in that direction. So I think as well, I'm looking at his picture on my wall now. You see what happened to Hitch, and drinking certainly didn't help him. So you just kind of take a warning lesson from those things and think, no, do I want that to happen to me? No. Well, there's something I can do about it now. And I'm very much a believer in helping your future self. If you could imagine yourself like 10, 20 years in the future, what would he or she be wanting you to have done now? and
Yeah.
try and do that as much as it's comfortable for you to do that. So yeah. Definitely. Pat Henson says, for those who are able to order from Amazon, they restock toilet paper and disinfecting wipes often. You just have to catch it. I check multiple times a day or when I'm watching TV. Check and refresh the web page often. Also, shipping dates are often changed to a date sooner than stated, so keep trying. Good luck and stay safe, everyone. I think that's an obvious way in which businesses can adapt, isn't it? Because if you have like a mail order delivery company and you've been in the business of shipping out tablets or MacBooks or whatever, there's an obvious gap in the market here for you to start shipping out things that people actually need that they would ordinarily have to go to the supermarket for. And we are actually seeing that as well in Croatia. There's a company that would normally just ship out electronic items and that kind of thing, and they've started making available basic commodities that you would otherwise go to the supermarket for. So we're not quite at the stage with our own supplies where we need to use it, but it's nice to know that it's there for when we need it.
Yeah. How has Croatia adapted generally, Lloyd, in terms of obviously no nation can instantly adapt, and I think this is one of the things we're finding is that even the most prepared nation or government has to spend some time finding its way and trying things. Okay, that didn't work, let's adapt, or we had no idea this would have this impact. So how's Croatia been managing, do you think, generally in terms of society or addressing those problems?
I think that to begin with, and again, I'm basing everything on what Deanna's told me. But she indicated that to begin with, there was quite a lot of denialism on the part of individual Croatians and people just kind of laughing at it and not taking it seriously. And then literally in like the last week or so, when was it that I had my root canal? When I was having my work done on my teeth, it was literally a case of one day we went into the local town and it was just business as usual. And then the next day or the day after, we went in and it was like a ghost town. It was like very suddenly there's this realization of, this thing's serious. And so by and large, the Croatians are now taking it extremely seriously. You do hear every now and then of the odd person, like locally, like in our village, who's not taking it seriously. But I think by and large, people are taking this seriously. It's just unfortunate because I mean, I think the economic factor is worrying no matter what country you're in. But in Croatia, there's already such high unemployment, and most people's salaries are incredibly low. I mean, if you were to get a full-time job in Croatia, you'd probably be lucky to earn 500 euros in a month, which once you've paid for your electricity and phone bills, you're down to half of that already, which is, and that's for a respectable full-time job. So I do worry for those who rely on like ordinary jobs as to the fears they're going to have. I can only assume that because everyone's in the same boat, it's not like businesses are going to be using this as an opportunity to shed all their workforce. You like to think that those jobs are still going to be waiting for them once it's all over. But nevertheless, are they still going to be getting the same levels of income through while they're observing this lockdown? So it's a scary time, isn't it, for most people? But yeah, in Croatia, they seem to be taking it quite well. And also the country has a small population of, I think, 5 or 6 million. So it's not like in Italy, just over the Adriatic, where it's densely populated and you have these massive cities where people are living in apartment blocks. You do have apartment blocks in Zagreb and in Split, but for the rest of the country, it's mostly very sparsely populated. And where we live, we're in a village in the middle of nowhere. So it's, I guess, at least psychologically, you feel safer because you're not kind of packed on top of each other, as it were. So let's just see here. Carolyn McLaughlin says we don't have masks in the US. That is disturbing, and obviously quite a bit on the news about New York being kind of the very much the front line at the moment. Let's just see here. Frank Rizzo saying, I work in the emergency department in the largest hospital around here. I'd pretty scary to be in this line of work right now. Yes, it certainly would be. Unica Savica says, my neighbor has horrible cough. Don't know how long she can hold it. I'm immune compromised. Good grief. Imagine being immune compromised and hearing a cough next door. Can't help her too much, but she has someone taking care of her. What's worrying, she still smokes. Matthew Tino saying, we have people making hundreds of them, I mean, I assume masks, in my area and dropping them off at hospitals. John Boy Diego says, I'll be interested to know what the governing body's spin on all of this will be when it's all over. Yeah, good point. And worldly men and their scientific medicine saved them all. Well, that's what's going to come to the rescue. And we were talking about this, weren't we, Covert, on our WhatsApp group, because I believe Mr. O'Donnell is working on an article about blood plasma. Are you able to fill in on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I don't want to steal Mr. O'Donnell. I like the way Mr. O'Donnell sounds very, very official, doesn't it? Mr. O'Donnell. I don't want to steal Mark's fire on it too much, but obviously, if there's one of the ways you deal with a virus is with antibodies. I don't know much about biology, but I do know that once you've had a virus, your body, once it's killed it generates antibodies that actually stop you from getting reinfected for a time and help you fight the virus. Now, antibodies are inside blood, and apparently blood plasma is a great way of conveying that. So it doesn't take a genius to think, well, if someone who's got the disease, if you can get antibodies into their blood, it might assist them. So one of the ways you do that is blood plasma. And one of the issues Jehovah's Witnesses have is they consider blood plasma to be a blood fraction. I believe they consider it to be a fraction that they can't have.
It's a main component of
it's blood. A main component, yeah. Sorry, it's
red cells, white cells, plasma, and what's the other one? Platelets.
Yeah,
platelets.
And the way they break it down, if I'm correct, is not the way that medical science breaks it down.
No, it's they basically do it off the way the blood responds in a centrifuge. So when you spin blood in a centrifuge, it just so happens to separate into these four substances, but that doesn't mean that is those are the components of blood.
Yeah.
Because, for example, hemoglobin is actually what makes blood red and makes up a large part of the blood. It's what is encased inside the red cell. In fact, a red blood cell is literally just a wrapper for hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is you could say, a principal component of blood, but because you can't separate it neatly in a centrifuge, Watchtower will allow people to receive, in theory, hemoglobin without being disassociated. Yeah.
Because as Paul ordered the Christian congregations to keep abstaining from the components of blood that could be separated in the centrifuge, but the hemoglobin was different to that. Yeah,
stupid. Yeah,
and the issue obviously becomes that, I mean, this has killed a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses already throughout the decades. But now, if there are potential treatments for this virus that potentially involve blood plasma, you can see that there's a car crash waiting to happen here. And this is unfortunately something where I think the witness body count may potentially be going higher, depending on how the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society decide to address the issue of blood plasma and antibodies. And I suspect, given their track record, they won't address it in a responsible way that prioritizes the lives of the witnesses over the governing body's dogma on this. So
you would think that any solution involving plasma would be kind of a stopgap more than anything, compared to actually vaccinating people.
Yeah.
But even so, if there's a way of saving life, obviously that should come ahead of everything, and you just know that the governing body isn't going to be down with that.
Yeah, and like you say, Lloyd, even if it's something that they only, like I said, they're using it as a stopgap for people who are horrifically ill, and it's like, well, we'll try this on you, or you're going to die anyway. The humane response would be, we'll try it on them, and the governing body's response would be, we'll let them die anyway. So
Mark O'Donnell is working on that article as we speak. Maybe, who knows? We might do a Watchtower in Focus on it. We'll have to wait and see. I'm open to doing that, so let's see what happens. Mario Haider says supermarkets in Austria will be offering masks for free for everyone starting tomorrow. Well, that makes total sense. But it was made public that those masks are not a full protection. They just prevent that the virus is spread more than necessary. Full protection masks are only offered to people working in hospitals or where really necessary. Yeah, whenever I see masks, I'm thinking this is just going to slightly limit it. You can still see, for example, air around. It's not like a full seal, is it? So, but anything that just slows things down, I guess, is a good thing.
Yeah.
Let's just see here. Eric Larson says it's the same type of people as are hoarding toilet paper and items like that. They feel they need a gun to protect themselves in case society goes down the drain and anarchy rules, or at least that's what I've heard anyway. I guess that's an unfortunate, you could say, byproduct of the pandemic is hysteria. I think that's what's being described here. You have reasonable precautions and measures being implemented, i.e. lockdowns, and then you have hysteria where people are hoarding toilet paper and going to buy guns. I mean, that's clearly unnecessary, isn't it?
I think it's interesting about the toilet paper one. I was reading about the psychology of this, because you think off the top of your head, if I was worried that I was going to be unable to buy things, I'd surely prioritize food and medicines over toilet paper. But they were saying that apparently there's that, and again, I'm not an expert, I'm mangling the articles I've read. Apparently there's like a psychological thing about toilet paper. It's something you can easily get in control. Yeah, literally. People latch onto it as something that's comforting and a symbol of something that I mean, if you Google toilet paper, why are people hoarding? There's actually quite a lot of interesting discussion about that. Because the gun, I can almost, without getting into it, if I lived in an area where the police response time was 2 hours away and I was genuinely worried there was violence, I can see why someone would think, well, I might need a weapon in case things really go badly wrong and people start smashing down my door to get food. Whether or not that's what would actually happen, that's another case, but I can kind of get that impulse depending on where I lived and what the social situation I was in. But the toilet paper thing is genuinely weird. But if you do the research thing on that, there's all this interesting discussion about why psychologically people have been doing that, specifically toilet paper. Because and again, it's like, I don't know anyone who's hoarded toilet paper, but maybe that's the thing people aren't admitting to. Maybe people hoard it but don't admit to it because they know it's a bit strange, but do it anyway. I don't know.
Well, it's kind of a vicious circle, because even if the reasons for people hoarding toilet paper are entirely irrational, it leads to more people buying toilet paper because they know others are hoarding it. So it's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a self-generating crisis.
Exactly. Sherry Dubois says, with Easter eggs, our rule was that buying them helped support the pagan effort. We wouldn't do it. Always wanted to, though. I think that's the thing with like JW stories of JW childhoods, is that every family was different, and there would be varying degrees of strictness, wouldn't there, depending on which family it was. So every family kind of had a law unto itself, and to a degree it's a little bit like that with congregations and indeed countries. So you can move to a different congregation and they'll have a slightly different way of doing things. And same with moving to a different country. In fact, when I moved to Croatia, I had a circuit overseer approach me who, like me, had been through MTS. And he said, just a word of warning, Lloyd. He said, you're going to notice that things are done differently here in Croatia. And he said, that's just because Croatia isn't as mature spiritually as the UK is. So please bear with us. That was literally what he told me. So, you know, how, and they boast about it being like one united brotherhood. But how can that really be the case if there are different incarnations of the religion depending on where you travel to, which I suppose is inevitable, but nevertheless, it contradicts what we were told, you know.
Well, it's that crash between ideology and reality, isn't it? It's that inevitable crunch, and the more the more black and white your ideology is, with Watchtower, the more the more the collision is going to be painful when the rubber hits the road. So
Indeed. On Twitch, Nitz Walsh says, I was a convert, but I remember Jehovah's Witnesses with kids having gift days close to Christmas, but not on Christmas, just so their kids wouldn't feel left out. Did you have this covert?
I actually did.
Yeah.
My parents they found a specific day that wasn't Christmas, but they wanted us to have the same experience that we had. And I remember like being really excited. Probably the same thing. You go to sleep all excited and you wake up. I mean, the difference is I knew my parents were bringing me the stuff, but I'd wake up and there'd be like some presents in my room. And they'd make it a special day, so we do special things on the day. We'd have special food, and I really like. And I think again, I'm actually quite touched that my parents did that, because they were very devout Jehovah's Witnesses who weren't going to break the rules, but they were clearly yearning for me to have all the nice experiences that they potentially couldn't give me if I was a strict JW. So they found loopholes like that. So yeah. I had that experience. Did you have the same thing?
Oh, definitely. We called them surprise days. It's not Christmas. It's not a birthday. It's a surprise day. And we knew that they were coming in advance. So we would get super excited about them. And there's one day in particular that always stands out in my memory. We were given some kind of treasure hunt almost, where we started off in the driveway and we followed the signs around our house and then inside our house and then through the house. And then we ended up in our front room, and all of the presents were kind of displayed across the chairs, across the armchairs. And there was a large, it was like a toy pool table, like a massive cardboard box with the pool table inside across the two chairs. And I also had a skateboard with a picture of a missile on it. Don't ask me why there was a missile on it. It turned out that even though they'd bought me a skateboard, I wasn't actually allowed to use it, because whenever I used to go outside on the pavement, Mum was terrified of me falling over. So I was only allowed to use my skateboard in our backyard, which was tiny. And in the end, I just used to amuse myself by putting our dog on it and just pushing our bewildered dog on the skateboard. But that's that. Whenever I think of what Nitz Walsh is describing, I think immediately, yeah, surprise days. We had those. Yeah. And also slightly traumatized at being bought a skateboard and not allowed to use it. But that's a story for my psychologist. Let's just see. Eric Larson saying my alcohol consumption was way worse as a JW. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how that works? You're supposed to be more using alcohol in moderation as a JW, but that's not how it works in practice. And certainly when we look at the organization and its leadership, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we see interesting evidence to suggest that there is an alcohol culture at the very top. So
yeah.
Adrill says, I remember an elder saying that he waits 24 hours before drinking the wine used during the memorial. What difference does 24 hours make? I guess it stops being magic after a day. Good grief. All sorts of arbitrary rules, weren't there?
Weird. I remember drinking the memorial wine and eating the memorial bread right after the memorial on certain occasions where I had access
right
to it.
After the memorial.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that means you're anointed.
Maybe I'm like 50% anointed. Like 50% of me is going to heaven.
I would call that a delayed participation.
Delayed participation.
So it's nice to know that we have an anointed member of the JWC team.
There you go.
Elaine Goodall says, my mum did that sometimes too. A few weeks after Easter, we got some chocolate eggs or rabbits. We weren't celebrating Easter because it was no longer Easter time, and it was now only like normal chocolate. I think some of these are slightly older comments. Rianne asking, why do you drink at all if you know you have a headache the next day? No offense, but just why? Well, I'm not saying I will have a headache. Usually what I do when I do drink is drink lots of water. in between drinks, and usually that has the effect of when I wake up I don't have a headache, but there's always the chance that the pendulum will just slightly drift into the red and I will have a headache. So it's not like a given that I'm going to wake up with a headache when I drink. Pat Henson says, I'm an undergrad student at UC Berkeley here in California. Wow. Welcome, Pat. We were one of the first colleges in the United States to transition to remote learning. Despite their best efforts, there has been 7 students diagnosed with COVID-19. Well, I'm sure that would have been much higher, or, you know, the likelihood of more catching it would have been higher if you hadn't taken that measure. So well done to UC Berkeley for doing the responsible thing there. Susan Weekly says, drank so much as a JW. Yep, but we all drank in moderation, quote unquote, didn't we? It was one of the only things we could legally do. Interesting to hear stories from Bethel workers and how much booze is scoffed down. Not a surprise to see top shelf Tony getting his grog. I would still love to know, Covert, what, if any, heat he got as a result of doing that. He obviously was on the annual meeting platform only 6 months later, albeit in a clearly, as far as I'm concerned, a clearly inebriated state. So, but some are even suggesting that the fact that one of the talks was, "Are you sober?" was like almost an attempt at giving like a response to Bottlegate. I'm not so sure about that, but you like to think that he would have at least suffered some pushback after that incident.
You think even if it's not? I mean, I can't. Weirdly enough, I can't see anyone telling Tony off for being drunk because he's too powerful in the organization, and they almost, you get the sense that everyone else who's probably telling him off probably has a booze problem as well. But I can definitely see them being like annoyed that he got caught, if that makes sense, or the kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I kind of wouldn't be surprised if there was at least some embarrassment and some conversations about, like, you know, not getting caught, or not, can you not, you know, get your booze so blatantly, because they're obviously aware of it. And if I remember at the time, they did seem to be, I mean, they asked for videos to be taken down, so they were clearly, if I'm remembering correctly,
they didn't ask me to take my video down,
but there were,
but they couldn't though, because it wasn't a Watchtower video, was it? So they couldn't pull the copyright thing on me. Baxter John says, gosh, I used to drink a lot, and I mean a lot. Not drinking at all now for about 15 years. I didn't miss a thing. I think, I mean, you mentioned before, Covert, about going dry for 6 months. I think one of the most challenging things about doing that is just how social drinking is.
Yeah.
And how when you go out socially, it's just inevitable if you're with friends that you're going to be offered alcohol. No one's just going to automatically see you in a pub and think, well, he's not here to drink alcohol. So I guess that makes it difficult, doesn't it? The social element of drinking.
Yeah. And kudos to Baxter Jan. I mean, if you're not drinking for about 15 years, the key thing with alcohol is if you don't want to drink, or you feel that you shouldn't, then good for you for staying off for about 15 years. So obviously everyone's got to make their own personal decision with that. But I mean, I know a couple of people who don't drink at all. I mean, I've gone back on alcohol a little bit. I can have it in moderation. I don't feel it's an issue for me. And some people just aren't interested in it. But I think that's the key thing with any kind of, with alcohol, is have as much or as little as you personally want or feel is good for you. And you don't need to defend it to anyone. So yeah, indeed.
Nesbo 9 says, I remember being really excited when our usual family study was swapped for playtime. Playtime, though, was reenacting one of the tales from the My Book of Bible study. No, I'm sorry, that was still your family study, I'm afraid. Anything that's Bible related means that it's still your. I think you fell for some quite clever logic there from your parents. Jonah's whale was a sleeping bag. Good grief.
Oh, that's a good one. So you can get in the sleeping bag when you get eaten by the whale.
More like clever, actually. More like Jonah's jellyfish, isn't it? I wonder what poor JW children are doing for fun during this lockdown. Oh, goodness only knows. But yeah, we had all sorts of stuff going down for our family study, but it was always still the family study. I guess the one thing that I used to look forward to, because we used to have all sorts of things like pretend meetings, and I would prepare talks and that kind of thing, and use the back of the armchair as my podium. We did all of that, but the one I used to look forward to was, right, for this week's family study, we're going to watch Jehovah's Witnesses, the organization behind the name, or To the Ends of the Earth. Some of the early attempts at video propaganda that the organization did, and I actually used to enjoy that, because it was at least we can just relax and kind of in a way disengage our brains a little bit, which you have to do to watch that stuff. I keep thinking, incidentally, it'd be really interesting to revisit the organization behind the name for like a rebuttal or something like that. But interestingly, they don't have that on jw.org. They have the 1950s documentary, The New World Society in Action, and that was from like 1954, but they don't have the organization behind the name, and I'd be interested to know what their logic is there. But hopefully one day it will find its way onto jw.org, and I'll be able to do, because you can find it on YouTube, but it's in a really poor quality. If I was going to do it, I'd want to do it with a decent quality copy. Let's just see here. Apologies, by the way, if there's any nonsense going on in the some people are complaining about a troll in the comments. I haven't seen them for some reason. Maybe it's someone I've blocked already. I don't know, but I'm just not seeing them. So I do apologize if someone's causing trouble. If there's anything I can do after the live stream has ended, I will bring the hammer down. I think Julia is addressing her comment here to Rianne. I share your longing to see your son. I am so disappointed that my boy won't be able to come home for the holidays. Thank goodness for technology. When I went for a walk with my daughter, we were able to have my son come with via Skype. Here's hoping they discharge him very soon. Yeah, this is a time when you really want to be with your loved ones, don't you? And if you're separated from them for some reason, it's going to be difficult. Cynthia Luna says, I recall my father taking me shopping for one special item on my birthdays. He was the presiding overseer and my mom a pioneer, but never a mention of the actual word birthday. Isn't that interesting? There's a little bit something like that. I don't want to say too much about Deanna's parents, but even though birthdays are supposed to be this kind of satanic ruse to get people to worship Satan, they don't elicit quite the same response as Christmas would elicit. And even Christmas, to some extent, is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek, oh, yeah, we're not allowed to do that. But even more so, I would argue, with birthdays. It's almost like, at some level, surely witnesses realize that they are completely harmless.
Yeah. Well, I always found it embarrassing to have to explain that one, because I would, as a JW, I could do the Christmas thing pretty well. I could explain, the pagan origins, blah, 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 which is, but birthdays, I was always like, I don't really have an answer. I mean, the explanation given about, well, there was a birthday in the Bible and it only mentioned it twice and it was in a bad light. Even as a JW, I felt that was reaching. And I was like, well, I'll go along with it. And it's clearly what the standard is, but I dreaded having to explain it because it made no sense. So, yeah.
Susan Wheatley says, oh, Lloyd, your skateboard story. Look, I'm not looking for any sympathy on that, because in fairness,
I feel sorry for the dog.
Yeah, you should be more concerned about Robbie, who I was pushing up and down on the skateboard. No, in fairness, apart from being raised in a cult and apart from the odd bit of trauma, i.e. the Armageddon drill, I actually think my childhood was actually quite a decent childhood. And, I have lots of fond memories from my upbringing. And I think with the skateboard thing, it was just a case of my parents being overly protective. And in a way, I'd kind of prefer them to be overly protective than not protective enough, and something bad happens. So yeah, it was quite funny though. They bought me a skateboard and they wouldn't let me use it. Okay, Bob Jamin says, being the spiritual head in my family, I've forgotten to do family worship for at least a year. Naughty, naughty. I did actually try and keep family worship going, because you're actually supposed to do it as married couples. And I tried to keep it going a little bit when I moved to Croatia. And we were studying, I think, the Bear Witness book, the one about the Paul's travels and the New Testament and that kind of thing. We started studying that, Deanna and myself. And for a while, we were kind of giving it a good go. But again, it just kind of coincided with me starting to lose my faith, and it petered out. Eric Larson says, my wife will be making her own bread and wine for the memorial. Should be interesting. Of course, they have a video now on how witnesses can do that, and I suppose witnesses will be saying it was fortuitous that the organization put that video out for situations such as this, where some may need to observe from home. Actually, I'm interested to know what happens when we have the memorial, because there's been some talk. I was interested in knowing whether what they would do about the emblems, whether they would literally have the emblems there, and like, even if it was just one person by themselves, just literally pick them up and put them down again. But I'm hearing from others that you only really need to have the emblems there if you're thinking of partaking. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the memorial comes around.
Yeah, be interesting to see if there's any long-term impacts from this as well, because I mean, I know we've speculated on it before, but this is forcing Watchtower to find new ways of doing things, and it'd be interesting to see if they like any of these ways and start changing things afterward.
I'm actually almost convinced that long term this is going to have a crippling effect on the organization, because what this is, you absolutely need, when you have a controlling group like Jehovah's Witnesses, you absolutely need them to be meeting together. I've experienced this myself. When you take that out of the equation and you put people by themselves with their own thoughts, so you kind of unplug them from this kind of herd mentality of, oh, this must be true because look, we're all doing it together, and we're all in our best clothes, and this is all very organized. Once you take people out of that environment, you are exponentially increasing the likelihood that they will just take a step back and think, whoa, wait a minute, what do I believe? And I think that what Watchtower needs to do, if they were going to be clever, is immediately after all of this has ended, just go all the way back to how they were doing things previously, and forget entirely about Zoom. If they pursue any temptation to conduct meetings remotely on a more regular basis, or if they do away with Kingdom Halls entirely in some instances in favor of doing meetings online, I see that causing many more witnesses to wake up. Baxter John says, gosh, I used to drink a lot, and I mean a lot, not drinking at all now for about 15 years. I don't miss a thing. I don't know whether I read that comment before.
We've done that one before.
Maybe I'm circling back round to the same comments. Sorry about that. Nesbo9 says, ooh, there is a question for the next JW survey. Did the lockdown affect your waking up process? That's
a good idea.
Bringing things bang up to date there, if we could include that. Can't wait to see any results. That would be actually an interesting question to ask. Mario Hyder says, actually, I never had that thought, because I always asked myself, what if Jesus celebrated his birthday? But the Bible just never mentioned it because it deemed it not as important. Don't know. I think that was the logic that we used to kind of answer with. Oh, well, it must be wrong because it's not in the Bible. But of course, just because it's not mentioned in the Bible doesn't make it wrong. It's just not good. Not a good argument.
Yeah, I mean, if it's something so mundane as to not be worth mentioning, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like there's so much of that. There's so many arguments around that whole. Well, if it's not in the Bible, it mustn't have been important. Well, there are so many other things you can then go to, which okay, did Jesus brush his teeth? Did Jesus, there's so many things you can use that argument on. It just kind of gives you it gives you a license to invoke whatever crazy laws you wish on the grounds that it's not in the Bible, doesn't it? So
Indeed.
yeah, that's a good
Bob
point.
Bob Jamin says, will there be any poetry tonight? Well, unless Covert wants to indulge us, no, there won't be, because Sasha's not here. So once Sasha returns, which he will do, I'm sure, we will have Sasha's poetry corner. Do you want to read us a poem, Covert? Or?
I would not be able to measure up to Sasha, so I'm not even going to try.
Very modest response there. Pat Henson says, I always heard that any and all birthdays mentioned in the Bible involved a murder. Yeah, that was the go-to answer, wasn't it? Since birthdays are never mentioned in a positive light, they are not pleasing to Jehovah. Sound reasoning, nice and dark.
The great response, and actually when I was waking up, one of the great responses I heard to that, which was genius, is like, well, if you're going to say that if a birthday's bad because it's only ever mentioned in a negative light in the Bible, it also means you can't have a pet dog.
Yeah.
Because the Bible only ever mentions dogs in a negative light. And that was, when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, that's absolutely true. That's why this whole line of reasoning for birthdays is ridiculous. So yeah.
Yeah, find a good Bible verse that mentions dogs in a positive way. Jenny Smith says, yes, I agree. Hopefully this will loosen the mind control on them. I think not just incidentally for Jehovah's Witnesses, I think for lots of religions, I think that there is actually going to be a tangible, noticeable impact on religiosity due to the coronavirus, due to people suddenly just having themselves for company and just being able to take a step back and think, and also just the urgency of the situation. I mean, when you have any kind of existential threat, it forces you to start asking some profound questions that you perhaps otherwise would have been too distracted to ask,
Yeah.
And Susan Wheatley, final comment, Lloyd, I was allowed to skateboard around the neighborhood and was pretty damn good at it, I must say. This was as a kid back in the 70s. My mom was whacked out in enforcing other dub rules, though. It's all relative. Well, at least you had your fun, Susan. And who knows, maybe one day I'll develop my skateboarding abilities and we can have a contest. How does that sound? But Covert, it's been an absolute joy to go through these comments and questions with you. We've had a very lively live stream with, there are 90 watching now. It's been dipping over 90 at times. And again, I'm really thrilled at how many views these are getting. Obviously, they don't get as many views as my regular uploads, but there isn't a single one that I've uploaded that hasn't had thousands of views. So I'm really encouraged to see that. And again, the whole point is to just make people feel a little bit less alone.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the nice things of what you say. At least we're now living in an internet age where when a pandemic hits and everyone has to spend time inside, we can all still talk to each other. So,
indeed.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking some time out of your morning to do this.
You're welcome.
Look forward to having you on a future show, but that's pretty much it, everyone. Oh, I did mention about April. Let me just briefly kind of lay out my plans for that.
Cool. I'm going to have to just drop off now and say goodbye because I have a work meeting. So take care, guys.
Thanks, Covert. Take care.
Bye.
Yes. So plans for April. I won't be doing it every day in April. It has been fairly grueling to get up every morning and know that, okay, it's showtime. I will be doing it tomorrow, incidentally, but that's because tomorrow is a Wednesday. And my plan for April is to do the lockdown live stream on Wednesdays. Let me see. Wednesdays, Saturdays, and there's another day, and Mondays. That's it. Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Mondays. I will be doing the lockdown live stream. But, and I haven't figured this out completely yet, I will be alternating the times at which I do it, because I realize there are so many in America, Canada, South America who perhaps would like to tune in, but it's in the middle of the night for them. So I plan to do at least one on a given day, whether it's, I don't know whether I'm going to do it on the Wednesday or the Saturday yet, but on one of those days, I'm going to be doing it at a time that's more conducive for people living in the Western Hemisphere. So again, I haven't fully figured things out yet, but I guess the thing to do is keep an eye out on this Facebook page, on the Lloyd Evans Cedars Facebook page. The link is here. Keep an eye out on that, and I will basically put out a schedule for April so that people can know when the lockdown live stream will be going out. And if you happen to be conscious at that time, it will be lovely to have you along, and hopefully it will be less grueling for me, and it will also mean that more people can watch the show. So that's the idea. I hope you can join me in April. But that's everything we have, not just for today, but for March. Well done to all of you who are staying safe, staying mentally coherent throughout this madness, and yes, staying alive through this pandemic. Let's do it together. Let's survive together and encourage each other. But that's pretty much all I have for you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.